The wind off Lake Michigan had a way of making even August evenings feel colder than they should. That night, August 12th, 2003, the air of Marquette, Michigan carried the salty bite of the lake mixed with the smell of wet pine from the forest that hemmed the small city in. Streetlights hummed softly along Lincoln Avenue, each cone of yellow light shimmering in the mist that drifted up from the shoreline. It was one of those nights when the world felt too quiet, like the city was holding its breath. And in many ways, it was because that was the last night anyone saw 19-year-old Claire Hensley alive. Claire was the kind of girl people remembered without trying. 5'2", all freckles and bright, earnest energy, with curly light brown hair that she tied up in a ponytail so tight it bounced when she walked. Her friends used to tease her that she moved like she was always late for something, even if she had nowhere she needed to be. She worked part-time at the Shell station off Wright Street, saved every penny for community college, and kept a tiny lined notebook in her backpack where she scribbled ideas for stories she hoped to write someday. Anyone who knew her said the same thing. Claire felt like a spark in a city that sometimes slept too heavily. That night, she had been closing up her shift. The store's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while she counted the final register, humming something under her breath. No one knew what song. Her supervisor, Mark Leland, a tired-looking man in his early 40s with drooping shoulders from years of night shifts, told police later that she seemed normal, maybe a little restless, maybe distracted, but nothing unusual. She wore her blue uniform polo, dark jeans, and her brown canvas backpack with the patches she ironed on herself. A small sun, a crescent moon, and a faded green one that used to be a mountain range before the color washed out. Mark remembered the ding of the cooler door as she refilled the last shelf of sodas. He remembered the way she glanced out the window toward the dark parking lot, as if listening for something. And he remembered the moment, exactly 10:56 p.m., when she slung her backpack over her shoulder and said, "Okay, see you tomorrow," before pushing the glass door open and stepping into the cool Michigan night. Cameras later caught her walking across the lot, illuminated briefly in the grainy security footage, her ponytail bobbing. Then she vanished off-screen. She should have turned left toward the bus stop. Instead, she drifted slightly right toward the wooded trail that connected to Division Street. No one knew why. When she didn't make it home by midnight, her mother assumed the bus was running late. By 1:30 a.m., she was calling Claire's phone, hearing it ring to voicemail every time. By sunrise, she was pacing the living room floor, clutching a mug she never drank from, whispering, "She always calls back. She always calls back." And by 9 a.m., she was standing inside the Marquette Police Department, trembling, telling the front desk officer that something was wrong. Very, very wrong. The official search began that afternoon. Officers canvassed the trail, the bus stop, the shoreline. They called friends, checked local hospitals, watched the grainy security footage again and again, pausing at the moment Claire slipped into shadow. But nothing explained the slight pivot of her body, the almost unconscious shift of her path. Almost like she recognized someone. Almost like someone called her name. In the days that followed, Marquette, population just over 21,000 at the time, was electric with rumor. Flyers plastered grocery store windows, telephone poles, church bulletin boards. People whispered during coffee runs, pausing to glance toward the lake as if the water could swallow secrets whole. Volunteers combed the woods with flashlights and neon vests. Claire's mother, Denise, barely slept. Her father, Henry, drove every road in a 5-mile radius each night until his eyes stung. And still, there was nothing. No sign of her backpack, no drop phone, no footprints, no clothing. Nothing that said what happened during the 5 minutes between the Shell station's parking lot and the point where the camera lost her. Police at first hoped she ran away. That theory evaporated quickly. Claire had $15 in her wallet. She left her phone charger at home. Her bank account remained untouched. Her notebook, her most valued possession, still sat on her nightstand. The sun rose and fell, until a full week had passed, and Marquette felt as if someone had drawn a curtain over the sky. And that was when the first tip came in. A man named Dale Corbett, a fisherman familiar to police for small-time offenses, claimed he saw a girl matching Claire's description near the breakwater around midnight on the night she vanished. He said he saw her walking with a man in a dark jacket. He said they looked like they were arguing. He said the man grabbed her arm. But when detectives pressed him for details, her shirt color, the direction they went, the man's height, his answers shifted. Sometimes she was wearing red, sometimes green. Sometimes the man was tall, sometimes average. The story dissolved under scrutiny, and soon even Dale himself shrugged and muttered, maybe it wasn't her. But the idea that Claire wasn't alone that night lodged itself in the community's mind. More leads came, more fell apart, and slowly, painfully, the search took on a different tone, less frantic, more desperate, as if everyone sensed the clock ticking down, as if every day without a clue stretched the distance between the girl they knew and the truth waiting in the dark. It wasn't until late September, more than 6 weeks after her disappearance, that something shifted. Marquette's leaves had turned gold, the air growing sharp and cool. A local jogger named Evelyn Parker noticed a torn piece of blue fabric near the edge of the forest trail off Hawthorne Street. She almost ran past it, but something, maybe instinct, maybe fear, made her turn back. The fabric was caught on a low branch, a piece of a shirt the same shade as the Shell Station uniform. Police swarmed the area within an hour. Dogs tracked a faint scent deeper into the woods, down a narrow incline toward a small ravine. The ground was disturbed, leaves flattened, branches snapped. Something had happened there, something violent. And though they didn't find Claire, they found a small silver earring, the kind she wore every day. The case was no longer just a missing person investigation. It was something far darker. Detective Shane Morrissey, a man with deep-set eyes and a gravelly voice hardened by 20 years on the job, stood at the ravine's edge that afternoon and felt the weight of the discovery. He told reporters later that he remembered the sound of wind moving through the trees and thinking it sounded like someone whispering, like the woods themselves were trying to tell him something. But the woods kept their secrets. As autumn deepened, tips slowed. Rumors dried up. Every lead went nowhere. And Marquette settled into an uncomfortable silence, as if waiting for an answer that refused to surface. Families still taped Claire's flyers to their car windows. The local church held a vigil in October. Candles flickered on the steps as her mother stood silently, her eyes hollow. Friends cried softly, holding each other. People prayed. They begged for a miracle. They asked for closure. They asked for anything at all. But winter arrived in the Upper Peninsula with its usual force. Heavy snow, frozen roads, ice crusting the lake shore, and the search became impossible. The woods hardened over. Trails vanished beneath drifts. The cold swallowed the landscape, making even the bravest volunteers hesitate. And Claire's case, once the heart of the community, slipped gradually into the category that no one wanted to say out loud. A cold case. Weeks turned into months. Months rolled into years, and Claire remained gone. Detectives came and went. Evidence boxes moved from desks to storage shelves. The file thickened with statements, photos, false leads, and the earring sealed in a small plastic bag. But nothing new surfaced. Not a single new witness. Not a single new clue. Until 2023. 20 years after the night Claire vanished, the city of Marquette changed. New faces, new families, new businesses. The Shell Station where she worked had been remodeled twice. The forest near the ravine had grown thicker, heavier. Only the lake remained unchanged, forever shifting, forever cold. But history has a way of resurfacing when people least expect it. And sometimes, the truth waits in silence until the right moment arrives. In the summer of 2023, that moment finally came when a construction crew began clearing the old industrial lot off Hawthorne Street to build a new municipal storage facility. They worked through June, flattening earth, breaking down old concrete foundations. And on the morning of June 14th, one of the workers noticed something pale jutting out from the soil. Something small, curved. At first, he thought it was driftwood. Then he looked closer. Then he screamed. By the time police arrived, the crew had already stopped working, gathered in a silent half-circle around the exposed patch of ground. Detective Emily Rourke, newly promoted and only 34, knelt beside the site and brushed the dirt gently away. Her breath caught in her throat. It was a human bone, and not just one. The earth beneath that lot had been hiding a secret for 2 decades. A secret Marquette thought it might never uncover. And as Rourke stood, staring at the soil that now held the answers to everything the community feared, she realized something else. Something chilling. This wasn't an accidental discovery. Someone had gone to great lengths to keep these remains hidden. And now, after 20 years of silence, the truth had finally begun to breathe. The discovery site was cordoned off within minutes. Yellow tape fluttered in the breeze, snapping softly like an impatient gesture urging everyone back. Detective Rourke stood over the exposed bones while the forensics team unpacked their equipment. Her eyes fixed on the curve of the soil as though expecting more of the past to break the surface. She wasn't old enough to remember the original search, but she'd grown up in Marquette. She remembered the flyers. She remembered the vigils. Everyone remembered Claire, even if they didn't say her name aloud anymore. Rourke's mother once told her that some tragedies become part of the air in a town, always present, even when unspoken. And standing there, as the summer sun pushed shadows across the construction lot, Rourke could feel that truth settling onto her shoulders like weight she was suddenly responsible for carrying. It took the forensic team less than 30 minutes to confirm what she already suspected. Femur, rib fragments, partial skull. The remains had been buried deliberately, deep enough to avoid casual discovery, shallow enough that 2 decades of frost heave and soil erosion would eventually push them upward. Beside the bones lay tatters of fabric, blue, faded, and near what had once been a left arm was a tiny silver object, caked in dirt. When a technician brushed it off, Rourke felt her stomach hollow out. Another earring, the match to the one found near the ravine in 2003. Word spread fast. Too fast. By the next morning, Marquette was buzzing again with a kind of energy it hadn't felt in years. Reporters lined the police barricades. Older residents whispered to each other with tight expressions, as if afraid to hope that answers might finally be coming. Inside the police station, old case files were pulled from archives, stacked like aging tombstones across the conference room table. Rourke sat among them, flipping through yellowed statements and faded photographs. She saw Claire's smiling face, caught forever in the blink of a snapshot. Wide eyes, bright teeth, freckles. A face frozen in time while the world kept spinning without her. Detective Morrissey, long retired, returned to the station when the news reached him. His hair had thinned, his back slightly stooped, but his eyes still held that same stormy intensity they'd had in 2003. When he stepped through the doorway and saw the reopened case spread out, he let out a quiet breath, almost a sigh. "I always hoped," he murmured, placing a hand on the box that once kept him awake for months. "I didn't think I'd live to see it." Rourke pulled up a chair. "We could use your memory. Anything you can tell me, the smallest detail, might matter now." Morrissey nodded, lowering himself into the chair with a stiffness that came from both age and regret. "I remember a lot, more than I wish I did." His fingers brushed one of the photos, Claire behind the shell counter, waving at the camera during some forgotten moment of levity. "We never stopped looking. Not really, but the trail just died." Rourke leaned forward. "You said once that you believed she knew the person she walked toward that night." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, the footage, grainy as it was, showed her posture shift. Not fear, recognition, like someone called to her, someone she trusted. And you never identified who that might have been?" Morrissey's jaw tightened. "We had a few names, people she knew from school, work, the neighborhood, all dead ends. Or so we thought." Rourke took that in, her mind already turning through possibilities. 2 decades had passed. Relationships shifted, people moved, died, hid, changed. But truth had a way of clinging to the world, no matter how deeply it was buried. The next piece of the puzzle came 2 days later, when the forensic anthropologist from Lansing delivered the first major update. The bones were confirmed as belonging to a young woman between the ages of 18 and 21. Based on dental records provided by the Hensley family back in 2003, they were highly consistent with Claire. More testing was needed, but everyone already knew it was her. It had always been her. But the real revelation wasn't the identification. It was the trauma. The skull bore a distinct fracture at the parietal bone, a crack radiating outward like a spider web. Blunt force. One heavy strike. Likely the cause of death. And there was more. Marks on the ribs, evidence of a struggle. Signs of restraint. The pattern of soil staining indicated the body had been moved after death. She hadn't been killed at the burial site. She'd been transported there. Rourke stared at the autopsy summary, her pulse quickening. A single strike, a struggle, restraint, movement, all deliberate, all controlled. Whoever did this hadn't panicked. They'd acted with purpose, with confidence. That meant familiarity with the area, or familiarity with Claire. 3 days after that, another discovery surfaced. The construction crew, instructed to continue carefully clearing the foundation area, uncovered a small rusted metal object about 15 feet from the main burial site. At first it looked like debris from an old pipe, but when Rourke picked it up, she recognized the shape immediately. An old-style padlock. The kind used on backyard sheds, storage units, or worksite utility boxes. It was snapped cleanly in two. Forensics cleaned it and found faint traces of blood in the grooves, degraded but still detectable. Not enough for DNA extraction, but enough to know it had been involved in something violent. Rourke stood in the dim evidence room after the discovery, staring at the padlock sealed in plastic, feeling the cold hum of possibility crawling up her spine. A padlock could be used as a weapon, a blunt object, heavy, jagged, capable of delivering a fatal strike. Was this the murder weapon? And if so, who had access to it? When she returned to the original case files, she noticed something she hadn't paid attention to before. A small handwritten note in Morrissey's early interview list. A name circled twice. A name with a question mark beside it. Ryan Calk. Rourke called Morrissey back into the conference room. Who was he? Morrissey exhaled slowly, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Ryan lived 2 blocks from Claire. Couple years older. Hung around the Shell station a lot. Didn't work there. Just loitered. Always seemed to have an excuse to be there when she was. Was he interviewed? Briefly. He didn't know her well, according to him. Said he was home the night she went missing. His mom backed him up. Why the question mark? Morrissey hesitated. Because something felt off about him. The way he talked about her. Like she was an idea, not a person. But there was no evidence. And you can't build a case on a feeling. Rourke nodded, understanding. But 20 years had passed. Alibis that once seemed solid might not hold under new scrutiny. Memories shift. People slip. And besides, something else bothered her. If Ryan was only 2 blocks away from Claire, the woods, and the industrial lot, geography alone made him worth a second look. She requested his old statements. Thin, almost empty. Barely 3 pages. Too clean. Too simple. So she dug deeper. And that was when she found it. A report filed in 2005, 2 years after Claire's disappearance. Ryan Calk had been arrested for assault during an altercation outside a bar in Eispreming. The weapon used? A steel padlock threaded through a bandana, an improvised striking tool. Rourke felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up. She pulled up his current information. He still lived in the area. Still in Marquette. 41 years old now. Worked at a local hardware store. Never married. A quiet life. Too quiet. The next morning, she drove to the hardware store. The bell above the door jingled cheerfully when she entered, utterly at odds with the grim purpose in her chest. A man behind the counter looked up. Broad shoulders. Thick beard. An expression that settled immediately into something unreadable when he saw her badge. "You're Ryan?" she asked. "Yeah," he replied slowly. "Can I help you?" "I'm Detective Rourke. I'd like to ask you a few questions." His eyes flickered, just briefly, to the door behind him, leading to the back room. A flash of something like alarm passed across his face, before smoothing into neutrality. "About what?" "An old case. I think you know which one." A long pause. Then Ryan swallowed hard. "I didn't have anything to do with that." She didn't say he did, but the speed of his denial was as loud as a confession. I'm going to need you to come down to the station. His jaw tightened. Am I under arrest? Not at the moment. Then I'm not going anywhere without a lawyer. He moved a step backward, but Rourke noticed something. A slight limp. Left foot, subtle but distinct. She glanced down. His work boots were worn unevenly. The left sole thin more than the right. Years of favoring one leg. Why? Later that afternoon, she looked through his medical history. In 2004, 1 year after Claire's disappearance, he'd suffered a severe ankle sprain, according to ER records. Treated at home by his mother. No follow-up. But the date of injury? August 13th, 2003. The morning after Claire vanished. Her heart pounded. She pulled up photos of the ravine area where Claire's earring had been found. Steep, uneven, easy to twist an ankle in the dark. The pattern was forming. That night, Rourke returned to the old industrial lot. It was quiet now, the construction paused, the excavation covered. She stood alone in the fading evening light, listening to the distant rush of cars along Hawthorne. She imagined the scene 20 years earlier. Dark, overgrown, secluded. A perfect place to hide a body at 2 a.m., especially if you live nearby. She whispered into the quiet. Why here, Ryan? Why her? The wind answered with silence. The next morning, she received the confirmation she'd been waiting for. DNA from a bone marrow matched Claire Hensley. The case was officially a homicide. The press erupted. The community surged with emotion, grief, anger, fear, hope. And amid the storm, one person remained conspicuously invisible. Ryan. He had taken an indefinite leave from the hardware store. He wasn't at home, or at least not answering. His mother, elderly now, claimed she hadn't seen him in days. A man who had lived quietly for 2 decades had suddenly vanished. Rourke issued a bolo. Officers searched his known locations. But it was an anonymous tip that finally broke the silence. A caller reported seeing Ryan's truck near the old abandoned boathouse along the Dead River Basin. An isolated spot. Few visitors. Dense trees and uneven ground. A place where someone could hide, or flee, or confess to the darkness. Rourke arrived with 2 patrol officers. The truck was there, dusty, locked, empty. The boathouse door hung half open, creaking faintly with each gust of wind. She approached slowly, hand on her firearm, her heartbeat echoing loud in her ears. Ryan, she called firmly. It's Detective Rourke. I need to speak with you. Silence. She stepped inside. The boathouse was dim, light filtering through broken slats and thin, dusty beams. Old nets and rusted gear lay piled in corners. And there, sitting on an overturned crate, was Ryan Calk. His elbows rested on his knees, hands clasped loosely, head bowed. When he lifted his face, his eyes were red. I didn't mean to kill her, he said quietly. Rourke swallowed, her breath tight. Tell me what happened. He stared at the floor as he spoke, voice trembling. I liked her. That's all it was at first. I'd go to the station to talk to her. She was nice. Always smiled. Never rude. Most people don't treat me like that. His voice hitched. But she didn't want anything to do with me. Thought I was weird. Everyone always thought I was weird. What happened that night? She walked out. I called her name. She recognized me. We talked for a minute. I asked if she wanted a ride home. She said no. I didn't want her to walk away again. Not like that. His hands trembled harder. We argued. She tried to leave. I grabbed her arm. She pulled away, started yelling. I panicked. I grabbed a padlock from my pocket. I used it for my shed, just to scare her, just to make her stop yelling. A tear slipped down his cheek. I swung once. Just once. She fell, hit the ground. I checked her pulse. Nothing. Rourke closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. What did you do? I dragged her in my truck. Drove to the ravine. Didn't know what else to do. I dropped her there. Thought maybe someone would find her and think it was an accident. He looked sick as the memories clawed through him. But then I got scared. I went back later that night. Moved her again. To the lot. Buried her. I didn't mean for it to happen. I swear, I just didn't want her to leave. Rourke stepped forward, her voice steady. Ryan, stand up. You're under arrest for the murder of Claire Hensley. He didn't fight, didn't protest, just lifted his hands, palms shaking, and allowed the cuffs to click around his wrists. The trial took months. The community followed every update, filling benches in the courthouse until there was standing room only. Claire's parents sat in the front row every day, older now, worn by grief but present. When Ryan gave his full confession to the jury, Denise Hensley lowered her head into her hands. Henry placed an arm around her, tears streaming silently down his face. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty. Second-degree murder. 25 years to life. The sentencing hearing held a stillness that felt almost sacred. When the judge announced the terms, Ryan stared ahead with an expression somewhere between resignation and relief, as if being caught had finally freed him from the weight he'd carried alone for 2 decades. After the verdict, reporters gathered outside the courthouse, microphones thrust forward, questions flying. But the person the town wanted to hear from most, Denise, said nothing until the final camera was almost packed away. Then she stepped toward the podium, her voice soft but steady. We waited 20 years to bring our daughter home, she said. We never stopped hoping, never stopped searching, and now we can finally lay her to rest. We are grateful to everyone who never forgot her. When asked how she felt about the arrest, she paused. Her eyes glistened. Nothing will bring her back, but knowing the truth matters. Justice matters. And remembering her matters more than anything. That evening, the community gathered at the same church where the vigil had been held back in 2003. Candles lined the steps again, glowing warm against the cool Michigan air. People hugged, cried, whispered prayers. Some held the old flyers, edges yellowed with age. Others carried white flowers. And for the first time in 20 years, the air felt lighter, as if the city had finally exhaled after holding its breath for far too long. Detective Rourke stood on the sidewalk across the street, watching the mourners drift inside. Morrissey stepped up beside her, hands in his pockets. You did good, he said quietly. Rourke shook her head. We all did. The town did. They never let her be forgotten. Morrissey nodded, eyes lingering on the candlelit doorway. Some cases stay with you, he murmured. Some take a piece of you when they go cold. But when one finally breaks, he exhaled, the breath trembling. It reminds you why we keep trying. Rourke looked out toward the dark silhouette of Lake Superior, listening to the waves push gently against the rocks. The same lake that had heard the search cries in 2003 now listened to the soft murmurs of closure in 2023. And she realized something profound, something she would carry into every case after this. Justice isn't always swift. It isn't always loud. Sometimes it takes decades. Sometimes it waits beneath the soil, beneath memory, beneath fear, until someone is willing to dig deep enough to find it. And as the lights in the church flickered warm and bright in the distance, she knew that Marquette had changed forever. Not because of the crime, but because of the truth that had finally come home. The truth that had once been buried. The truth that refused to stay silent. The truth that, after 20 long years, finally breathed. Even after the trial concluded, the city of Marquette struggled to reconcile the past with the present. Streets that had once felt safe now carried memories too sharp to ignore. Every corner, every trail in the woods, every streetlight along Lincoln Avenue reminded the residents of the night Claire vanished, and the 20 years that followed. Parents held their children closer, neighbors spoke in hushed tones, and the air itself seemed to carry the weight of history. But there was also relief, tiny, fragile, but undeniable. The kind that comes from finally knowing what happened, from seeing someone held accountable, and from having the certainty that justice, even delayed, had found its mark. The Hensleys, for their part, began the painstaking process of reclaiming their lives. Denise, who had carried a year-by-year burden of uncertainty and grief, started attending therapy regularly, seeking ways to navigate a world that had changed while she had been suspended in a limbo of waiting. Henry, quiet and methodical, poured his energy into restoring the small cabin the family had long owned outside the city, a place where you feel some semblance of peace amid the memories that haunted every corner of their home. They grieved openly, spoke of Claire often, and refused to let her memory fade into the silence that had defined so much of the previous 2 decades. The community also began to heal in its own way. A memorial park was proposed near the industrial lot, where Claire's remains had been discovered. Plans included a small path lined with native pines, benches inscribed with the names of other missing individuals in the area, and a fountain to honor the resilience of families who had endured the long, unbearable wait for closure. Local high school students painted murals depicting hope and remembrance, working late into the night under strings of lights that transformed the empty lots into vibrant expressions of collective memory. For many, the work was therapeutic, an act of communal mourning, a tangible acknowledgement that the tragedy had not been forgotten. Detective Rourke, despite being lauded for her persistence and skill in reopening the cold case, remained haunted by the details she had uncovered. Each time she drove past the old Shell station or the wooded trail, she felt the invisible weight of that night pressing down on her. She replayed the interviews, the forensic reports, the confession of Ryan Koch, and even the minutiae of her own observations, as though each moment might hold something she had missed. Sometimes, late at night, she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling in her apartment, wondering if other cases, other victims, were waiting in silence, their stories buried beneath years of dust and doubt. Claire's case, grim as it had been, reminded her that persistence mattered, that truth could not be buried forever, no matter how carefully someone tried. For Ryan Koch, the consequences were immediate and unrelenting. He was sentenced to 25 years to life without the possibility of parole, a term that reflected both the premeditated nature of his actions and the deliberate concealment of Claire's remains. In prison, he was studied by psychologists who documented the chilling pattern of obsession and impulsivity in his behavior. They noted his obsessive fixation on control, the meticulousness with which he hid the crime, and the long years he had spent living in quiet proximity to the community, blending in as though nothing had happened. Fellow inmates quickly learned to avoid him, sensing a tension that even the guards acknowledged. Ryan became a cautionary figure, a grim reminder of the potential for violence in someone who seemed ordinary, familiar, and entirely unremarkable. Yet, even with the conviction secured, questions lingered in Marquette. How could someone live among neighbors, walk familiar streets, go to the same stores and bars, without anyone realizing the darkness beneath? How could a life so ordinary conceal acts so violent? These questions were whispered in grocery stores, at church gatherings, and at the Memorial Park's construction site. They became part of the dialogue, a mixture of disbelief and horror that would persist for years. And for Claire's friends who had grown up with her, now adults with their own families, the answers arrived too late to change their grief, too late to bring back the ordinary moments they once took for granted. The investigation into Ryan's actions also prompted a re-examination of other cold cases in the region. Detectives revisited files that had languished for decades, re-interviewed witnesses, and employed modern forensic technology that had been unavailable in the early 2000s. DNA profiling, digital mapping, and psychological profiling became tools not just for solving Claire's case, but for approaching other mysteries that had gone unresolved. In many ways, the case reignited a professional urgency that had dimmed over the years, a renewed commitment to ensuring that no case could be permanently forgotten simply because time had passed. Marquette's police department adopted new protocols for reviewing cold cases, inspired directly by the success of Rourke's efforts and the unearthing of evidence that had seemed lost forever. Claire's family, while still enveloped in grief, also focused on legacy. Her notebook, which had sat untouched for 20 years, was carefully preserved. Pages filled with adolescent musings, story ideas, and tiny sketches were digitized, compiled into a memorial book that could be shared publicly. Denise organized a scholarship in Claire's name, intended for young writers in the Upper Peninsula who exhibited creativity, persistence, and community engagement, qualities that Claire had embodied in her short life. Every year, students would submit essays, short stories, and poetry in her memory, ensuring that her voice continued to echo, even though she no longer could speak herself. The scholarship became more than an academic prize. It became a symbol of endurance, creativity, and the triumph of remembrance over oblivion. As winter descended on Marquette that year, the community's reflection took on a quiet poignancy. Snow blanketed the city in white, muffling sound, softening the edges of streets and forests, and giving the impression that time itself had slowed. Families walk along the newly constructed paths in the memorial park, leaving candles and flowers for Claire and others who had vanished, a ritual that connected generations through grief and hope. Detective Rourke, on a solitary evening, walked the same paths, feeling the crunch of snow beneath her boots. She thought about the careful reconstruction of Claire's final moments, the forensic breakthroughs, and the confession that had finally ended a decades-long nightmare. And yet, she also reflected on the fragility of human memory, the fragility of justice, and the unrelenting need for vigilance in a world where ordinary people can sometimes harbor extraordinary danger. The city council approved a permanent plaque at the memorial park, listing Claire's name alongside others who had disappeared in the region. It became a place of both sorrow and reflection, where people would come to remember, to grieve, and to draw strength from the stories that refused to be silenced. Denise and Henry Hensley attended the unveiling, holding hands and bracing against the sharp wind off Lake Superior. Their voices trembled as they read the inscription aloud. May we never forget the lives taken from us too soon. May we honor them by seeking truth, justice, and compassion in our own lives. Those words, though simple, resonated deeply with the community, reaffirming the idea that remembrance was an active, living process rather than a passive acknowledgement of tragedy. Ryan Kalk, now confined to a maximum security facility, became a case study for criminal behavior experts. Interviews revealed a complex, often contradictory psychological profile. Someone who outwardly appeared calm, approachable, and unremarkable, yet internally consumed by obsession and entitlement. He expressed little remorse, often framing his actions as impulsive errors. Yet he could not escape the meticulous record of his deeds. For Marquette, he was a figure of both fear and fascination, a reminder of the darkness that can exist just beneath ordinary appearances and the long shadows it can cast over an entire community. For Detective Rourke, the resolution of the case provided closure but also reinforced the inherent difficulty of policing human behavior. She returned to her work with a renewed commitment to diligence, understanding that the skills, patience, and intuition applied to Claire's case would be necessary for every case she would ever investigate. The methods, the careful attention to detail, and the willingness to challenge assumptions became guiding principles not only for her, but for the next generation of detectives in Marquette, ensuring that the lessons learned from 20 years of silence would inform future investigations. The Hensleys eventually held a small private ceremony to lay Claire's remains to rest near the family cabin, surrounded by close friends and relatives. The service was intimate, reflective, and peaceful. Denise placed Claire's favorite notebook atop the grave, a final tribute to the girl who had dreamed so vividly of the future she never got to live. Henry, strong and stoic, carved her initials into a small wooden cross, a simple yet enduring reminder that she had existed, that she had mattered, and that she would never be forgotten. Friends and neighbors whispered prayers, shared stories, and released small lanterns into the sky, each one carrying a message of remembrance, love, and enduring hope. In the weeks that followed, Marquette settled into a new rhythm. The haunting questions that had dominated the city's consciousness for 2 decades began to fade, replaced by a cautious optimism. Schools incorporated lessons about the importance of community vigilance and empathy. Local organizations emphasized mental health support, and families found reassurance in the knowledge that even the darkest events could eventually be illuminated. Claire's story became part of the city's collective history, a narrative of tragedy transformed by persistence, courage, and the eventual triumph of truth. Years later, as Detective Rourke reflected on the case from her office overlooking the lake, she understood the profound impact it had on her life and career. The story of Claire Hensley was more than a cold case solved. It was a testament to human endurance, the resilience of families, and the idea that justice, though sometimes delayed, cannot be extinguished by time alone. Every investigation she pursued thereafter carried the echoes of Claire's case, the reminder that meticulous observation, unwavering determination, and the refusal to forget could alter the course of lives, communities, and the moral fabric of society itself. And in the quiet moments, when the wind off Lake Michigan whispered to the trees and carried a faint scent of pine, Rourke sometimes imagined Claire smiling, her energy, her light, her spark alive again in memory. The girl who had vanished in the night, whose life had been stolen too soon, had finally returned to the world she had left behind, if only in spirit. And for Marquette, for the Hensleys, and for those who had never stopped searching, that was enough. Even as the years passed, the story of Claire Hensley remained alive in Marquette. Not just in memory, but in the subtle ways the city itself had changed. Families walked their children along the same trails where she had disappeared, holding their hands tightly, their eyes alert for shadows that once went unnoticed. Teachers told the tale in hushed, careful tones, emphasizing community responsibility, vigilance, and the courage it took to pursue the truth. Local journalists revisited the story annually, marking the anniversary of her discovery and conviction, reminding residents that while time could pass, the lessons of loss and perseverance remained. For many, Claire's name became a symbol of hope, of grief, of the unrelenting search for justice that defined the town's conscience. Denise and Henry Hensley found themselves speaking at events, not just about their daughter, but about the process of enduring grief, the importance of remembering, and the power of persistence. Denise often recounted the moments after the initial discovery of the remains, describing the mix of horror and relief that accompanied the knowledge that their daughter's story was finally reaching an end. "It's like the world stopped breathing for 20 years, she said once at a community gathering. And when it finally exhaled, it wasn't just relief. It was understanding. It was closure. It was recognition that she mattered, that we all mattered, and that truth, no matter how long it sleeps, always finds a way to wake up." The scholarship established in Claire's memory flourished, drawing submissions from across the Upper Peninsula. Essays, short stories, and poetry poured in, each entry carrying the echo of her spirit. Curiosity, compassion, and an insatiable thirst for understanding the world. The winners, presented annually at a small ceremony in the Memorial Park, were often too young to have remembered the original disappearance, yet they felt the weight of her legacy. Each story, each page, was a testament to resilience. And as students read aloud in the presence of the Hensleys, the crowd, and sometimes Detective Rourke herself, it became clear that Claire's life, though tragically cut short, had extended far beyond her years through inspiration, remembrance, and the lessons of endurance. Rourke remained involved, quietly observing the scholarship ceremonies, participating in training sessions for younger detectives, and mentoring officers who were taking on their first cold cases. She emphasized patience, attention to detail, and the absolute refusal to let assumptions dictate outcomes. "Every detail matters," she reminded them. "The smallest clue, the faintest recollection, the tiniest piece of evidence can be the difference between closure and decades of silence." Claire's case proves that the truth never truly dies. It just waits for someone brave enough to find it. Her words carried the weight of experience, and those listening understood that the story was more than procedural. It was personal, a measure of humanity itself. The legal aftermath left Marquette shaken but reflective. Ryan Kalk's conviction stood, and while appeals and motions were inevitable in a system built for review, the community largely felt the scales had been balanced at last. News outlets reported periodically on the developments, often pairing updates with reflections on persistence of law enforcement, the resilience of the family, and the long shadow that unsolved crimes cast over small towns. Psychologists who had analyzed Ryan noted that his behavior fit patterns that could have predicted dangerous obsessions, reinforcing the importance of early intervention and community awareness. The combination of crime, psychology, and law became a topic in local classrooms, community centers, and even informal book clubs, as Marquette sought to integrate the lessons of the past into its present. For the Hensleys, the healing process was uneven but real. Denise sometimes found herself tracing the letters in Claire's notebook, recalling the tone of her voice, the rhythm of her laughter, and the flashes of insight she had shown even as a teenager. She carried a sense of grief that was lighter now, softened by knowledge and memory, tempered by the realization that while nothing could replace what had been lost, the truth, finally spoken, provided a foundation on which to rebuild. Henry, more taciturn, continued his work on the cabin, maintaining the trees, repairing walls, and building small memorials, benches, carved stones, and carefully placed lanterns. These acts of quiet devotion were both tribute and therapy, a tangible way to honor Claire, while simultaneously reclaiming their own lives from the years of uncertainty and fear. The Memorial Park became a symbol of communal resilience, with plaques honoring others who had vanished or been lost under mysterious circumstances. Community gatherings, particularly on anniversaries of Claire's disappearance and discovery, included readings, silent vigils, and moments of reflection. Each candle, each whispered story, became a bridge connecting generations, the past, the present, and the hope that vigilance and care could prevent future tragedies. The site also became a place of education. Local law enforcement partnered with schools and community groups to discuss safety, awareness, and the importance of reporting concerns promptly. It was a living reminder that while crimes could leave scars, proactive community engagement could leave marks of healing. Detective Rourke eventually returned to her office overlooking Lake Superior, her gaze lingering over the horizon where water met sky, endless and unyielding. She thought often about Claire's life, the choices that led to her disappearance, and the painstaking unraveling of decades-old secrets. Her reflection encompassed not only the professional triumph of solving a cold case, but the moral dimension persistence, the quiet courage required to confront uncomfortable truths, the humility to follow evidence wherever it led, and the endurance to withstand criticism, doubt, and failure over the long arc of investigation. She understood that closure was not simply the apprehension of a perpetrator. It was a restoration of narrative, memory, and justice to those who had lived with uncertainty for too long. Sometimes, on warm summer evenings, Rourke would walk the paths near the Memorial Park. Children's laughter, soft and fleeting, would mingle with the rustle of trees. Families paused to leave flowers or candles, and she could hear faint echoes of the past. Claire's voice, imagined as bright, curious, alive. She allowed herself a small smile, acknowledging that while the tragedy could not be undone, the world had shifted in a meaningful way. Claire's story, once silenced, now informed lives, inspired vigilance, and reminded community that remembrance was a form of power, one that could transform grief into hope, fear into action, and loss into enduring purpose. For Marquette, the city that had slept under the weight of uncertainty for 20 long years, the lesson was profound. Justice, patience, and persistence matter. The quiet acts of investigation, the painstaking analysis of evidence, the refusal to accept incomplete answers, and the communal insistence on memory all contributed to restoring balance. And while no single act could erase the pain, the cumulative weight of truth, accountability, and remembrance provided a path forward. In every visit to the memorial, in every lecture or scholarship award, in every reflection by those who had lived through the uncertainty, the story of Claire Hensley continued to resonate, a testament to the enduring human spirit and the ultimate triumph of truth over silence. The Hensleys, the detectives, the community, and even the city itself learned that some truths, no matter how deeply buried, cannot remain hidden forever. They surface when someone refuses to stop searching, when evidence finally speaks, and when memory refuses to let go. And as the sun set over Lake Superior, casting long shadows across the Memorial Park, it illuminated not only the path of grief and remembrance, but the resilience of those who had endured. Claire's life, brief yet luminous, had left an indelible mark. In the faces of those she touched, in the stories told of her laughter and curiosity, in the scholarship recipients who carried her spirit forward, her presence remained. It was not a return of the life stolen from her, but a new form of life, a legacy that intertwined with every act of remembrance, every pursuit of justice, and every moment of reflection. And in the quietest hours, when the city slept beneath the cold stars of Michigan, one could almost imagine Claire walking along the trail she had once taken, her ponytail bobbing, her eyes bright with wonder, a small notebook clutched in her hand. She had vanished in 2003, yes, but she had returned in memory, in justice, and an enduring testimony of a town that refused to forget. 20 years had passed. Justice had been served. Truth had breathed. And Marquette, forever changed, finally exhaled.